Let's bring in Kiran in from Toronto. I'm interested that you describe yourself as an ex-Muslim. Just explain that to us.
Yes, hi. So I was raised Muslim in a Muslim family. I'm from Pakistan, a Muslim majority country. However, over time I realized that for me, Islam was not, it was just a religion like any other religion. I did a lot of research into it. I studied it in depth. And for me, it became a matter of not agreeing with basic ideas of how the world is seen and how, the idea of God is seen in Islam. And I also, like I said, I'm an atheist. I'm not, or an agnostic atheist, and I don't believe in any of the other religions as being the correct one either. However, I think what we're talking about here is not just a matter of theological debate. I think we are talking about a political, socio-economic context for the extremism that we have seen, that is the content of this show. And I do agree with my the colleagues that I've heard so far that this is a very complex and complicated issue. It's not that we cannot just look at one aspect. There are political, economic issues that surround the alienation that I think a lot of people feel who are from Muslim backgrounds. I believe that alienation, that sense of isolation, that sense of othering of Muslims versus everybody else is fed and strengthened by community leaders, quote unquote, and by religious clerics of certain kind. Not all of them, but some of them actually do have built careers on continuing to feed that sense of alienation. And this is happening all across the world, in UK and outside. We are seeing a lot of funding for very hard right-wing Salafi type of ideology that's coming from Saudi Arabia, which is funding a lot of the mosques and religious schools in the UK and in other places, in other parts of the world. And that's feeding this ideology. There are many kinds of Islam. There are many different interpretations, many visions of what Islam means. And there are many different kinds of Muslims. So it's not that all Muslims are extremists. It's that the ones who are extremists are the ones who are getting put on BBC, for example, or Anjem Choudary.
Well, of course, and Anjem Choudary was, you're absolutely right, on the Today programme on the BBC Today, and there's been a lot of discussion on Twitter throughout the day of whether that was right or wrong. Anjem Choudary has actually been on World Have Your Say in years gone by. In fact, Jeff, was he on a programme with you?
I shared a cab with him, and we had a comedy situation where we were in a cab, and we lived quite close to each other, and so... It was quite comical because we're in the cab and I started asking questions and his whole argument fell apart in the cab. Anyway, I won't go into it.
He basically was part of Al Majharoon, which is a banned organisation in the UK, has headed many religious organisations in the UK, but is widely regarded as an extremist who wouldn't condemn the Woolwich attacks. I think most people listening to this would not for a moment suggest that all Muslims are involved in this. I guess what's interesting, if you like, is that if you look at attacks around the world, there aren't many other religions where people use violence in the name of their religion. It seems to be something which is...
Because we've lost control of the brand. That's what's happened, you see. Right. Someone in another part of the world, why did you do that? Oh, because of Islam. Because so-and-so offended so-and-so. Why was there was a story with a teddy bear a few years ago, someone called a teddy bear Muhammad, and that person for that reason. So Islam is something that lots of Muslims have brought out when it suits them. I mean, you mentioned Anjem Choudary. I remember sitting in a cab with him and saying to him, well, Anjem, why don't you get a job? Why are you using British money? Because I was having like a light-hearted conversation. Why are you using British money? You're condemning Britain and yet you've got no problem about taking money. And he said, no, it's not Britain's money, it's Allah's money. And I said, oh, come on. When you want to, suddenly, you flip the argument. And so that kind of argument, those people need to be confronted, but they shouldn't be overblown like they are the community leaders, because they are not the community leaders. They are people in their own community, are very small fry. They're just so not important.
Yeah. And they're often self-appointed. There's no actual system for these community leaders, quote unquote. And sorry to interject, but I think that one of the issues is I do think that there are problematic verses in the Quran. I think there are problematic hadiths in the hadiths.
Can I just stop you with a quote there?
However,
there's a quote.
However, that is not unique to Islam.
But Kiran, can I just give you a quote? Do not think that I have come for peace. I have come with the sword to make mother fight
So
father.
I'm not
Mother
sure if
fight.
you
And you know
heard
where that quote is from?
I'm not
Matthew
sure.
10:34. And I usually
Yeah,
say
can
that
I
in my
just-
stand-up. People often think that that's
I'm
that
not sure
quote
if
from
you
the
heard
Quran.
the
It's a
rest
quote from the
of what I
Bible.
was saying.
Can I-
I'm
Yeah.
not sure if you heard the rest of what I was saying, which I was saying is that it's not unique to Islam. However, we
okay.
have to acknowledge that it also is in Islam. And what we have to, as somebody who does not believe in Christianity either, I do not agree with that Matthew verse that you said as well. And what I'm saying is that Christianity has historically been used to justify violence as well. So let's not forget.
And
the history of
atheism
what
Yeah,
has
it
as well.
been.
Yes,
Atheism has as well.
can
I mean,
can
Chairman
sorry.
Mao, Stalin, these people weren't religious and they caused a lot of
and
problems.
Exactly. Can I
They
just
did not.
sorry,
They did
add
not commit what they did.
also
They did not
that-
commit what they did and justify it with atheism. The difference is that
They justified it with communism, didn't they?
Can I just interject?
Kiran, just take a breath. Go in, Imran.
Sorry, in terms of the whole religious debate, and it's been made clear that yes, religion has been used. We know from the Crusades, that there was a whole array of Muslims who were murdered historically. But it also adds to the narrative that there is, secular extremists, there are animal rights extremists, there are religious extremists. In my mind, the Rohingya who are being murdered and who are using, the monks and the Buddhists are using their sort of...
They've even got Buddhist extremists now.
And you're right, but it's not across the
Finally.
world. I mean, if you look at where, and I want to keep this in perspective, but if you look at attacks carried out by a minority of Muslims in the name of Islam, it stretches from Nigeria to Syria to Iraq to the West. It goes everywhere. These other instances, other obviously than the Christian Crusades, which, go so far back, they are limited to certain regions. And I just wonder if it's simply a case of the sheer number of people who are Muslims in the world. When you've got 1 billion Muslims, you're just going to have a few nutters who decide to use it, or whether there is something that is being wrongly interpreted. I'm just curious on what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, there's 2 points there. Sorry, and then I'll let somebody else jump in. Of course, there is the issue that maybe it's more Muslims, or maybe, the population, all that. But I do think fundamentally there are issues in the way people are interpreting some of the faith. I'm a Muslim. I believe that Islam is a religion of peace. And the way I read the Quran is probably totally different to the way Anjem Choudary is reading the Quran, and is different to somebody else. And I don't think we should be blaming the Quran. We should blame the person who's reading it. And I think this is where the problem comes, because there are clearly madrasas and schools of thought, maybe in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, where they do sort of emphasize this sort of wrong interpretation. And I think that is critical in this discourse, is that it is easy to label terrorism with the word Islamist and Muslim with the word extremist, but surely there needs to be a way where we look back and say, look, extremism is extremism, whether it's anti-capitalism, whether it's anti-abortionist, whether it's animal rights, and let's look at it from that point of view.
Well, I think, if I may, I absolutely agree with some of your arguments. Absolutely. There is not one way to interpret, let's say, Islam. There are different Muslims. If all Muslims were extremists, then we would have 1.5 billion extremists in the world, and we don't. So obviously that is not the majority view. I think majority of Muslims are good people. They're just like everybody else. There's nothing specially wrong with Muslims. There's nothing that creates that makes them different. It's what happens. I think, like what I was saying earlier, is that there are economic and political issues. There's a sense of alienation. I think that there is anti-Muslim bigotry that is often said, and I do think that those factors go into it. But like our host is saying about how this is happening across the board in different countries, I'm not saying that Islam is to blame and Quran is to blame. What I'm saying is that there are things in the Bible, there are things in the Quran, there are things in the Veda, in the Hindu text, that are problematic. And I'm not saying that it's that stuff to blame. It's people who actually enact those things. But the fact is that if we don't even acknowledge that they're there, then how are we supposed to even address the issues that for some people, that's what they use to justify the violence that they enact?
Yeah, but some of the people who I think the people who condemn these things should be a bit more empowered. I mean, going back to what you said earlier on about someone like Anjem Choudary on the radio this morning. He's somebody who's been overblown. We saw that with Abu Hamza. We saw it with Sheikh Omar Bakri. These people didn't really represent anybody. At their meetings, there'd be like 4 people sitting there who were there from the night before or whatever. They really haven't got a following. But
I agree.
they
I
were so
absolutely agree with that.
overblown.
What I
I mean,
think-
we would see on the Sun, I don't read the Sun, but you'd just see it on there. You see him on the front cover, you'd see Abu Hamza there with his hook, and it became like he was the only Muslim in the
Abu Hamza
world.
became almost a caricature, didn't he? He's
Yeah.
now been deported to Jordan to face terror charges, but for a long time he
Abu
wanted-
Qatada.
Sorry, Abu Qatada.
Yeah.
But people, it became almost a caricature, didn't it,
Yeah.
of people. I want to read this comment to you, which is coming from Alex in Kenya. He posted on Facebook, the answer is for the rest of the world to respect Islam. And Melissa has replied on our Facebook page saying, I agree that Islamophobia does play a role in radicalisation as well. Having faced many insults myself, I know how cold it can make you feel towards people and how much of an outsider that you can feel. Obviously, that's not an excuse, but it can play a role as part of radicalisation.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm on the streets of Britain, we see
What I
bunkers.
want to know is how are we defining Islamophobia here? Are we talking about where people are making racial and ethnic slurs towards people who are of Muslim background, or are we talking about questioning religion? Because if we're talking about questioning religion, then it's really no different from questioning Christianity, from questioning Judaism, which is done all the time. So what I'm wondering is
Those
what
two-
do you
can
mean
I-
by Islamophobia here?